Hi everyone, today's build is an old build that I started a while ago but never finished. As you can probably tell from the old turntable footage, I cracked this casting open a while ago but never did anything with it. The plan is to build this as a member of the Highway Patrol. So the first thing I do is add this Chemistry Designs hood pan. Which I then add this Chemistry Designs air scoop to. After that I add this Cromlech skull as a hood ornament. But later decide I don't like it and move it to the top of the air scoop. Next I add these Chemistry Designs exhausts on the back. On the front here I add this Chemistry Designs police bumper guard. For the driver I use one of these 20mm Wasteland Bad Cop figures that I recently bought from eBay. Naturally he won't fit into the seat, so I need to cut it and make room for him. So I use my sprue cutters to cut away the original seat and the dashboard. And then use a file to sand on the area just to make it easier to attach the new figure to. After a quick test fit and I'm happy where he sits, and then apply some super glue and then stick him in place. For the wheels I thought I'd use the old drawing pin trick to make armoured hubcap. Firstly I remove the pin with some sprue cutters. It's best to use an old pair of sprue cutters because this will damage them. And then position this over the wheel and glue it into place like so. Next, to add a little bit more detail to this, I glue a rhinestone into the middle. So since the glass for this casting is moulded in blue, I decided I'm just going to not use it. But I still do want to use the police sirens on the top here. So I use my sprue cutters and then just remove the rest of it. And then use some super glue to glue the sirens into place like so. To replace the windows I plan to use some mesh, which I couldn't shape off camera, and then glue into place like so. Next I add this minigun from the North Star Military Figures Implements of Carnage sprue. And then make an ammo belt for the minigun out of a zip tie. Cutting it to length and then trimming down the width. And finally, off camera, bending it into shape. After all this I can then glue it into place. For this side I decided to add this rocket pod, which is also from the same sprue. Lastly, for the rear defense weapon I'm going to use this flamethrower, which is from the Ramshackle Games 20mm car conversion set. Onto the battle damage, I use my hobby knife to carve some bullet holes into the body, followed by using a file to rough up the body a bit to make it look like it's been damaged from rams and such. onto the painting. Originally I was going to paint this map black, but unfortunately I don't have any police decals and I don't really want to not use the ones already on the casting. So instead I elect to just do some dry brushing. So the trick with dry brushing is to remove as much paint as you can, so I scoop as much paint off the brush as I can here and then wipe it on some tissue paper just to get as much of the paint off the brush before lightly going over the model, like so. For this I'm using Revell Rust. And then follow this by only going over the top surfaces with some Revell Bron. Next I paint the base plate with some Revell Matte Black. I paint the interior with some Revell Stone Grey. At this point I realised I forgot to paint the engine, so I paint that black again and then go over it with the same dry brushing process. Back to the base, I paint the running gear with some Revell Rust. I then paint the driver's uniform Revell Matte Black because I want to model him after the Mad Max 2 cops. I use some Revell aluminium to paint the interior as well as the driver's helmet. I use some Revell Bron to paint the exhausts to give them that nice rusty effect. For the flamer and rocket pod I use some Revell steel. Then use some Revell aluminium to paint the engine and minigun. For the minigun's ammo belt I use some Revell gold. For the skull on the front I use some Revell beige. As well as use this to paint the headlights and do a very messy job which I clean up later off camera. For the backlights I use some Revell purple red. I also use this for one of the lights on the light bar on the roof. For the other side I use some Revell ultramarine blue. Back to the driver, I felt he was lacking some colour, so I paint these face masks with some Revell purple red. For the bullet holes and battle damage I use some Revell aluminium. Onto the wheels I start with some Revell Matte Black. Followed with some Revell Rust for the hubcaps, which I then dry brush on some Revell aluminium. Then lastly, as usual, I use my homemade black wash. This blends everything together and also gives it a very nice wastelandy rundown look. And here we have the final build. I'm quite happy with the way this one turned out. I forgot to point this out during the build process, but I kept the hatch open so that I could add loose figures in and out when I wanted to use them. When I wanted to use this in future animations. This will make a great addition to my highway patrol gang, which is currently mostly made up of low haulage miniatures from the Devil's Run Route 66 game, which is a game I got into before I got into Gaslands. You'll see some of these miniatures in the glamour shots. It was pointed out whilst I was working on this, it looks a lot like Outlaw from Twisted Metal, which wasn't my original intention, but I can see the similarities and the inspiration there. It was pointed out whilst I was working on this looks a lot like Outlaw from Twisted Metal, which wasn't my initial intention while building it, although now that I can see the similarities, it did influence the end animation that I made for this vehicle. As usual, please stick around for the glamour shots and end animation, and I'll see you all in the next video.